Okay, so in our last video, we completed the wiring for the RGB LED on the breadboard and tested to make sure that that was working. Okay, now we're at step 4 in the Magpie Essentials for GPIO 0 in the CPU monitor using an RGB LED. And that asks us to install this library, PS Utilities. So we're going to go ahead and open the terminal. And in that terminal window, we're going to type in the command sudo pip3 install psutil-upgrade. Okay, now I've already installed mine, so when I execute this, it's going to go through and tell me at the end that it's already been installed. So it says requirement already up to date, but when you run it the first time, it's going to a progress monitor. It might take a minute or so to bring in that library. Okay, so now we're going to complete the rest in Thonny, and this was our file that we used to test the LED. Okay, now we're going to modify this, so I think actually I'm going to create myself a new file, and we'll call this one CPU, oops, save, file, save. There we go. Okay, I'm going to call this one CPU monitor plus RGB LED.py. So I remember what that is. Okay, and now I'm going to go over here to my import statements where I had assigned, there we go, Control V. So where I assigned my LED pin numbers, right, that's still going to be the same from my previous wiring. From my GPIO 0 library, I'm importing my RGB LED functions, and then we're going to, from time, import sleep, and then I also want now to import that library that we just brought in, which was the PS Utilities, so PSUTIL. Okay, and that'll pull in that package that we just installed. Okay, then I've got my LED assigned to pins 21 for red, 20 for green, and 16 for blue. And then in a forever loop, so while true, I'm going to have my CPU variable. I'm going to call that package PS Utilities that I just grabbed, and then I'm going to use the function CPU %. Okay, and that tells me the percent of my CPU that is being used at the time, and it's going to return that value and assign it to the variable CPU. Okay, now my R, my red, I'm going to set to take that returned percentage, CPU, and divide it by 100. Okay, my green, I'm going to set as 100 minus the CPU divided by 100. And then blue is going to always be equal to 0, because I want my CPU usage monitor to range between red, which is high alert because it's full capacity used, and green, which is good. There's plenty of processing power available. Okay, now I'm going to have my LED output the color. So LED.color, and then R RGB. So if my CPU was at 100% capacity, then it would be 100 divided by 100, which would make my red full intensity, right? And then 0 divided by 100 would turn the green off entirely. So it'll be fully red when it's at full capacity of use. Then the other part of that is if it's not being used at all, so CPU would be 0%, 0 divided by 100 is 0, so my red would be off, and then 100 divided by 100 is 1, and my green would be at full intensity, okay, if that makes sense. So now we're going to need to put a delay on here, so sleep 0.1, otherwise it'll go so fast we can't see anything. And then I'm going to go ahead and save and run. Okay, so now we've got the camera on the breadboard. I'm going to hit run here to run my CPU monitor. And right now the only thing that's in process is this program checking the CPU. So it's hardly in use at all. So now I'm going to open up a browser window and I'm going to do a search here for YouTube, and notice it's blinking a little bit in the red. Now I'm going to click on a link to go to YouTube, and we can see a little bit more green-red back and forth. Right now I'm going to click on a video, and playing some Christmas music. Right, and we can see that it's blinking red, right, because the video takes more processing power.